Hey, it's the Fish Guy with Something Fishy bringing you another episode of Fish Guy TV. Today, we're going to talk about maintenance on a saltwater reef aquarium. The most important thing when you're starting to service your aquarium is to make sure that the carpet or flooring is protected around the area in case you have any drips along the way. So a couple of towels or a moving blanket on the service area is good so that when you're putting your buckets down, it's protecting the floor. Once that's done, you can move on to inspecting your aquarium. This should be done when the lights are fully on and, if you can, have been on for some time. You're going to look for coral polyp extension, that the current or motion of the corals is good based on the flow in the tank. You want to look at the coral placement to see if any corals are stinging other corals and might need to be moved during or after the service. And then of course you want to look at the fish as well. You'd be looking for clear eyes, any spotting on the fish or streaking. Spotting of course would be a sign of a parasite if you saw something like salt, or maybe a fungus that looked more like a cotton, or streaking would be a type of bacterial infection. Now that we're ready to move on to maintaining the aquarium after our inspection, we want to decide whether we're going to leave the light on or off. Obviously leaving the light on helps us see around our maintenance a little bit better. That's completely fine as long as when we do the water change of about 20% or so, that we're not going to be exposing any of the corals above water. If we are, we do want to leave the coral light off so that it does not burn any of the corals. In this case, we're going to do a 20% water change, which will bring the water down to about here. So we're going to leave the light on and go ahead and turn all of the other equipment off. Our power heads, our heater, our pumps, UV sterilizer, any equipment that might be on the tank for the filtration. We'll go ahead and do that right now. Once the power is off, it's a good idea to test the salinity in the water. In a reef tank, we should keep the salinity around 1.025 or 2.6. We're using our refractometer to do that, which is going to be one of the most accurate ways as long as your refractometer is calibrated. It's going to be much more accurate than your average hydrometer. Once we've tested the salinity, we can move on to testing with a basic test strip, your nitrite, nitrate, and also the pH. And we can go ahead and do that just by following the instructions on the test strip. And the nitrates in a reef tank should be anywhere between 0 and 20 is ideal, and no nitrates at all. Your salinity again should be at 1.025 or 6, and the pH in a reef tank should be at 8.4. It's a good idea to get these metrics before we start our service, and then also again at the end of the service, and you can record them so that you have a log of the history of the water quality within your aquarium. Once that's completed, we'll move on to a wipe down of the internal glass or acrylic of the aquarium. In this case, it's glass, so we want to use a glass appropriate pad that is provided by an aquarium store. You don't want to use a sponge or anything that might have soaps in it from the store. So once we have a pad that is approved for glass, you can go ahead and clean that. I would recommend using the pad only above the gravel line. Stay within an inch or so away from the gravel line. And as you wipe either left to right or up and down, you want to overlap every stroke that you're doing with the pad. That way you make sure to cover all the algae. It's important, even though there's no visible algae, to do a really thorough job cleaning the glass, because if you miss any spots, the algae will continue to quickly develop. Using a white pad also helps, because as you can see here with what Cortland is doing, the pad actually shows some algae on the tank walls as he's wiping it. Once you're done and you've done a thorough job, you'd carry that process out throughout the front, sides, and back of the aquarium. Then you move on to cleaning the gravel line. You want to use a different tool for the gravel line, one that if you get sand in it at a later date, that tool will not be used anywhere else above the gravel line. We like to keep a pretty pristine looking aquarium, so cleaning that gravel line is going to be important. In a tight space like this, you could just use your hand to make sure that there's no visible algae. Or if you're going to use a cloth that's not on a stick, just don't use the same one that you use elsewhere above the gravel line. Once the gravel line is clean and there's no visible algae on it, then you can go on to doing your water change. again, be careful to make sure that if your light is on, you don't expose any of the corals. If it is necessary to expose the corals during your water change, then you want to shut your light off and leave the corals out of the water for as little time as possible. 5 to 10 minutes for most of your leathers or hard corals is going to be okay for them. In a smaller tank, we're just going to use a standard siphon tube. In order to get the siphon started, you're going to vertically set the tube in the water, and you're going to fill it with water, being careful not to knock any of the corals. As you pull that up out of the tank, you want to have your thumb covering the hose end over your bucket, and then open your thumb, start the siphon. As soon as your thumb gets wet, stop it, put the siphon tube back in the water, and then go ahead and invert the tube, and you'll have created a nice siphon. In small tanks like this, you can get the tube into some of the tighter areas, as Cortland's doing here. You can see the debris coming up the tube. If the sand gets more than halfway up, you want to pinch the hose to slow down your siphon, or just pull the tube right out of the gravel. You might lose some sand during this process, and every several months have to replenish it. For the most part, you want to keep the sand from being completely removed from the tank through the pinching of the hose. We're going to do about a 20% water change on any tank that is fairly clean, and we're doing proactive maintenance. On a reef tank, that'd be about once a week. You can see the debris coming up in the tube. When Cortland first puts the tube into the gravel, you see a burst of darker detritus. That's the debris, fish waste, excess food coming out of the tank. What you're seeing here would be considered normal debris in a tank, which should then dictate your water change volume, which again is going to be about 20%. If you were getting a lot of dark areas of debris coming up your tube, you might want to increase your water changes, or certainly look at increased maintenance. Again, we do our maintenance about once a week. With a reef tank, it's important to keep the debris off the live rock, so one thing that you can do while you're doing your siphon or vacuuming is remove the actual vacuum head, as Cortland has here, and then go ahead and use the end of the hose to siphon in and around your corals or your live rock. And you'll see this tank's fairly clean, but if you had a problem with any debris building up, you could do this. You could also do the same thing with a turkey baster as well. That would work very good. All right, if the tank's clean like this one is, that's not entirely necessary, and again, just done when needed, and if there's debris within the live rock and the coral. Now that our water change is done, we've done a wipe down of the tank. We want to just take a look at any power heads within the tank and make sure that they're free of any obvious debris. And once that's done, we can go in and of course make sure the teeth on any filtration components are clean and free of debris, along with those power heads that we checked. We do typically clean the back walls free of any coralline algae. You can use a razor blade. This tank is well maintained, so you don't have a lot on the back. If it did, you could use a razor blade or a tool made by Kent Marine that's a red scraper. And that red scraper will typically work without scratching any of the glass or the material. If you're using a razor blade, you obviously have to be very careful and make sure to stay away from any silicone corners. Once you've completed that, you can go on to changing the filtration. The filtration should typically include some kind of mechanical pad. In this case, it's going to be a pad that also has a carbon pack in it. The mechanical pad or the carbon pack used should be what's recommended by the manufacturer of your filtration system. Now it's time to replenish the water within the aquarium. It's critical that we use what's called reverse osmosis deionized water. That's going to be purified water that is typically available at your local store, and certainly here at Something Fishy we provide that. That water is basically tap water that's goes through 4 filtering stages to become purified. Once it's purified, it is then ready for fish as long as you add salt to it. We've already prepared that for you, and we can go ahead and add the salt water directly to the tank that we've made up from our RODI unit, and those buckets are right here. Now, we have already checked the salinity in the aquarium, which is 1.025, and we are going to add the same salinity water to the tank, again 1.025. If our salinity in the tank was lower, for example 1.020 for whatever reason, then we would want to add water that had higher salinities, such as 1.30, to counteract that. Again, we want to get it to the correct level when we're done with our service to 1.025. When adding water to the aquarium, it's important to do it very slowly so you don't stress out the corals. Once you've replenished the water in the aquarium and turned the system back on, give it a minute or two and then go ahead and test your salinity. Again, our target was 1.025, and as we test it, again using our refractometer, we're going to get the most accurate reading. Another tip is that refractometers should be calibrated on a weekly basis using distilled or freshwater RO water. With the accurate salinity, we then want to test and maintain the calcium. Your calcium in a reef tank should be at about 450 depending on the test kit. Again, you can follow the recommendations on your tests. We also have an entire episode just on additives to a reef tank. During most services, you're going to be maintaining your calcium, your alkalinity and pH, which are done with a product called 8.4, and then also ions, which is a magnesium product to keep the magnesium levels appropriate in the fish tank. With the water change completed, the supplements added to the aquarium, we can now do a secondary test for nitrite and nitrates to see if there's been any reduction due to the water change. Again, we do this just as a secondary test and to keep a log of the tank's water quality and performance over time. Once the water change is done and everything is back on, we want to do a very thorough inspection of all the filtration equipment. We want to make sure that the power heads, the heater, the filter pump, any type of protein skimmer or UV sterilizer are all operational and working properly. Once you've inspected your equipment, move on to inspecting the glass under normal lighting or acrylic to make sure that you haven't missed any algae, that there's no algae buildup on any of the live rock or on the sand. If you had any hair algae in a tank, you could use a small brush to brush that off during your service, which we didn't have that in this case. You should also go on to inspect the corals that are in the tank and understand that they may be closed up due to the stress of the maintenance that you've performed. Once you've completed that, you can now use a product called Safe and Easy to clean up any of the outside of the tank. You could use this for your cover, you could use this for your lighting, and certainly on the glass or acrylic. And you want to use a clean cloth so you don't scratch the acrylic or the glass. It's normal that the tank will be cloudy for a couple of hours after the service, and that will clear over time. There is a product called Clarity that will bond together all the small particles that are clouding your tank and expedite the clearing process. Purigen is another important product that you really want to have in your reef tank. Purigen is a media material that will be inside of a stocking bag, and that bag you want to place in a high flow area such as your sump. Just be careful that it can't be drawn into your pump intake wherever you place it. Purigen is going to take impurities, dissolved solids, and organics out of the water, and also should be changed on a regular basis. Depending on your tank size, we do our maintenance every week, and we change Purigen approximately every 2 weeks or so. And you'll have to follow the instructions based on your own tank size. So that's how you maintain a reef tank. These steps and procedures that we followed today here on this 29-gallon aquarium, those same steps can be taken to maintain even larger aquariums. It takes about 30 minutes or so to maintain this tank, and we do that once a week. We highly recommend less maintenance more often and maintaining the tank before it actually looks like it needs to be maintained. Remember, most of the harmful things found in your aquarium actually aren't visible. So visible indications of your tank not looking good, it's really too late to try and get it back on track at that point. Regular maintenance is very important to keeping a healthy system, as you see with the tank behind us. If you have any questions, please visit our retail stores. We're here 7 days a week for you. Go to our YouTube channel, our website, or book a consultation in your home, and we'll get it right for you so that you're successful in this hobby.